Hello, space friends. It's me, your friendly capsuleer pirates, Triglavian warrior, Maximilian Bonaparte, with another EVE Online video, a slightly different one this time. I am naturally camera shy, so I don't appear on camera very much, but I specifically made this Triglavian mask, 3D printed it for that purpose. It is the first one. There are elements of it that I wish I could have done differently, and this is perhaps a bit of a work in progress, but it's a start. But today, this video is not going to be so much about EVE spaceships, but an aspect of EVE Online that is perhaps a little bit scary. And which is true of pretty much any massive MMO, but especially EVE, since EVE is super complex and has a myriad of very complex relationships with other players. And the big question is, does EVE change you? Does it change your personality after you've played it for a few years? The answer is absolutely yes, it does change you. Now, the question on everyone's mind, I'm sure, is in what way does it change you? Does it change you for better or for worse? And if it changes you for worse, can you recover from it and can you make the most of it? So let's get into it. When most people come to EVE, as I did, they look at it as another casual space game. And that's fine. Because in many ways it can be a casual space game if you want to just sit on some rocks in some asteroid belt and mine, or perhaps mission. But it is inevitably a social game. There is contention, even if you're a miner and bring in your load of ore to sell. You're selling on a competitive market. So that pits you against someone, and this means that you are inevitably going to have a relationship with some other player in some way. Perhaps it is simply about pricing your items to sell in the market. Perhaps it's a relationship with the local gankers in the area who might blow up your mining barge. Or if you're a more aggressive player like I was, perhaps it's a relationship with those who you fight and those who you fight with. And in this way, relationships form in the game, both good and bad, right? When you begin to realize all this after playing, perhaps you realize it within a week of playing, perhaps you realize it within a year of playing. Many of you who continue to play will begin to form an alter ego, just as I did. My alter ego being Maximilian Bonaparte. I am a big fan of conquest and strategy, I admit, even though in the game itself I'm not much of a conqueror at all. More just like a pirate that sort of has some fun and entertains people. But at the time when I started, I named my character, of course, Maximilian Bonaparte, because, well, Napoleon Bonaparte was a great strategist, great grand strategist, and he knew how to manipulate strategy and all that. And I thought, perhaps, if not in my real life, perhaps in this alternate game universe, I could become this. I could really become known as Maximilian Bonaparte, and well, over time you begin to realize that doing so is hard. It is very hard, and the path that you think you're going to choose from the beginning may not end up being the path that you're on. So certainly for me, with the first 2 years of playing EVE, I was more of an explorer with some PvP, with distant aspirations of perhaps becoming a pirate, and then maybe a conqueror someday. But I am still not a conqueror, but I sort of, in the background, have that aspiration. The point is, an ego emerges, an ego that you didn't know you had. So you become egocentric, arrogant, and this manifests in a number of ways. Perhaps you fancy yourself an awesome explorer. Perhaps you fancy yourself a deadly PvPer or a pirate. Perhaps you fancy yourself just to be rich, and you love to show off your big old spaceship dicks everywhere in the game, because this is a very male ego-oriented game, and Dudes like to show off their big stuff, right? So the ego emerges. But the ego also gets challenged. The ego likes challenge. It's not so easy. So when you suffer a defeat, and you come back from that defeat, your ego gets reassembled and it becomes stronger. And then it happens again, and you get reassembled and you become stronger. Until eventually, you start to develop this alternate personality. Is it a good personality or a bad personality? Well, we'll get to that. But also, as you're developing this alternate personality, a new set of skills sometimes begin to emerge that you didn't know you had. Perhaps it's organizational skills, perhaps it's people skills, perhaps it's diplomacy, perhaps it's negotiation, perhaps it's a skill for command. So, in my case, it was a skill for strategy. I did become eventually the leader of the best exploration corp in EvE, and after suffering a number of Vordex, as you'll see in my EvE story series, which I am going to continue, by the way, I'm sorry I haven't, something emerged in me, the ability to lead people and to talk to people and to communicate well. That's probably one of my best attributes, and this really came out in EvE. This came out in other aspects of my life as well, and so these skills emerge from a game that you can apply to real life. Okay, but let's backtrack a little bit. Sometimes with that ego, and with that challenging of the ego latches on very hard, and then the game becomes something like an addiction. And there's many reasons people play EvE. And perhaps escapism is a big reason, as it certainly was for me, in the situation where I was perhaps taking care of two people who were suffering and on their way out of life. There's any number of reasons why people play EvE, and perhaps over time it can really become this obsessive thing where you really have to get back on there and take care of what needs to be taken care of, and in which case sometimes real life gets neglected, but sometimes it doesn't. It's just something that you need to keep you going. My attitude about addiction over the last year and a half especially has begun to change. Sometimes addictions are a very necessary thing until they no longer serve their purpose. And also, one thing that was said to me that was very impactful is that the subconscious is always stronger than the conscious. So if you think you are in control, your conscious is not in control. That's just your ego. If you're telling yourself that you're going to do this and you're going to do this and you're going to do that, that doesn't mean anything. It's the subconscious that actually determines what you're really going to do. So if you're not aware of your subconscious, it seems like you're out of control all the time. So if your subconscious is telling you something, you'd better fucking listen to it. So what then happens is sometimes people reach rock bottom and their EvE personality is completely impacted and disassembled. And many people find themselves crying themselves to sleep over a game, or completely having a nervous breakdown. I've seen this. So, what happens after that? A lot of people reach a certain breaking point. Well, one of two things. They quit the game and they say it was all a waste of time. I have an argument against it being a waste of time, by the way, which I'll come back to you later. Or they form a new personality, a new ego, a new, more resilient way of being. Is it more authentic? Maybe not quite yet, but we're going to get to that. So you form the new personality, and you adapt, and you develop even new skills, even more new skills. And you start doing new activities. In my case, I went from explorer, semi-PvPer to full-time PvPer, and somewhat honorable pirates, and I learned a lot about PvP. I'm not great at it, trust me, but I learned a lot about it. I have a lot of knowledge. I don't win very often, but that's beside the point. I never did bring the culmination of I joined an excellent pirate corp and learned a lot. However, in my own independent corp, I never did bring that vision of what that pirate alliance was to fruition. Maybe someday. But I did become something else. We'll get to that in a minute. But over time, I began to have an even more, semi-psychedelic experience, I would say, with the yes, the Triglavians appeared. And at first I was like, I don't understand that. And as I began to look at the Triglavians, there was something that really resonated. I think the thing that resonates about the Triglavians, and I'm wearing this Triglavian mask, by the way, is three things. One, cryptic, mysterious. For two, wicked and badass. For three, beings that want to evolve through adversity. And that's what EvE is all about, evolving through adversity. That's what the Triglavians are all about. You have this concept called cladistic proving. They did everything in threes, and there's something about the symmetry of the number 3 that really resonates with me. For a while, I was a little bit obsessed. I had dreams about Triglavians. That piped down a little bit, but the point is that there's something great about the symmetry of a Triglavian. You have a positive and a negative, and the culmination, the coalescing of that positive and negative is will, its intent, its purpose. So you have 3 points: the left, the right, the forward, the negative, the positive, the will, the upspin electron, the downspin electron, quantum entangled, and creating a vortex of power between them. A filament, so to speak. I love all that crap. There's whoever really came up with the Triglavians, I don't know if they're still at the company. I think they may have done some psychedelics. Anyway. Did that improve my EvE gameplay? Oh, I don't know, because the problem with me is I'm always challenging myself to do something harder and harder. It's like I'm not content with just winning all the time. It's like I have to underdog it all the time, and so it feels like I'm never winning. Well, I'm winning 60% of the time, but never 90% of the time, because I'm always biting off more than I can chew with less people than I have with this or that. Anyway, perhaps someday that will change, and someday I'll have a new endeavor. But the point is, authenticity.
Who are you? Who are you?
There is something infinitely more authentic as time emerges. As you challenge your ego, as you go through adversity, as you break apart, as you fall into pieces and coalesce back together again, you eventually become something new. Now, those of you who observed, people who seemingly have wasted years of their life on EvE, and perhaps they did, perhaps in neglect of many other things. Some of those people were leaders of giant alliances, tens of thousands strong. Not all of them were upstanding citizens. Some of them were quite asshole-ish, I will say. Some of them were great in a certain way. All were human, all had flaws, all were imperfect. I'm certainly not perfect myself. But before you think it was all a waste, consider all the content, all the stories that came out of it. And this is where you have a story to tell, even if it was through pain and suffering and through embarrassment. Even if you were the guy that when faced with certain defeat, instead of going out in a blaze of glory, you logged off and said, I'm going to go get some fried chicken. However, you provided content, right? You provided an experience. You provided life. You provided something that you can relive in your mind or relive through a story you tell someone else. So that is how you can reclaim what seems to be lost energy in EvE. You can go get it back, see it for what it was, tell the story. I recommend reading the book Empires of EvE. It's quite good. It goes through all of this. No, I burn out on EvE quite often. I come back to EvE and I play for a few months and then I burn out for a few months. Perhaps someday I will consistently play, and when I do, maybe I will become that conqueror Bonaparte that I thought I would be. However, it's okay. When I look back on EvE, I think, EvE helped me to learn how to communicate. EvE challenged me to take control or take charge of a group of people who have no purpose. EvE helped me to create content, to create stories. EvE gave me the ability to sit in front of a chamber of commerce and talk to them about how they could improve their database in my hometown. Things like that. I would say overall EvE has become a net benefit. And EvE, if done correctly, can help you find that alternate personality, which then no longer becomes an alternate personality, but more a revelation of your authentic self. Fly dangerous, space friends. God damn it. Alright, I'm gonna do what they say. Well, Space Friends, thank you so much for watching. I'm sure I'll improve this mask and my getup and costume over time. I'm sure I'll get a green screen and all that soon. Also, please comment for the algorithm and subscribe and like. Commenting especially helps a lot. Also, consider supporting the channel at patreon.com/resurrected. Thank you so much for patrons I already have. By the way, you guys know I do custom Starship renders there. Those of you who signed up a long time ago but haven't got anything new, feel free to hit me up on Patreon. I'd be happy to do a new one for you. This is a bit of a milestone for me. I'm sure hopefully I'll appear on camera. I'm hoping to kind of do the Daft Punk thing. You will probably never completely see my face, unless you're already one of my friends. Until next time, Space Friends.